hopefully the future will be different in this field. And I, for one, hope that the future is going to be excellent, participatory, and diverse. So I'm looking forward to that kind of future conferences as well. I'll say a few things about my background. So my name is Dorothea Kleine. I'm the director of the ICT4D Centre at the University of London. And this is particularly the RHUL College, which is part of the University of London. And I've got this opportunity to basically work there with a number of colleagues. We are a multidisciplinary centre with 10 colleagues from different disciplinary backgrounds: computer science, geography, information systems, who am I missing? And of course management. So a set of disciplines. And we've got a group of about 10 PhD students as well, 8 master students and so on. So we're kind of a cluster. And what we are hoping to do is basically have big exchanges across continents, really. I was chatting to Gary also about exchanges with colleagues in Africa. Certainly we have strong links with SPIDER and also with Örebro University, who are kind of key also in the IPID network. So do explore us. We're 20 minutes away from Heathrow. Come say hello when you're in the area. We've got a kind of lively program, lively community there. And if you're interested in finding out who else is there, because there's many more people than me involved, I'm just going to pass these around, and on one of the pages you're going to find a list of all my colleagues. And you may find on this page, if you're interested, ICT4DC.org, you're going to find a list of the academic staff and their research interests, and then the postgraduate community. And on this part of the website, here's the URL again, you'll see that we basically aggregate all the blogs from both postgraduate students and academics. So you can basically have here a platform where you can read what's going on the various blogs of people. And there's a Twitter feed if you want to see what colleagues currently are writing from the ICT4D Centre about ICTD 2013. You can kind of find that on our joint Twitter feed, and it might be quite interesting to see. And what colleagues are doing, again, our postgraduate colleagues are very involved in the open sessions as well. And I'm just going to pass that around because it shows you the list of what our postgraduate colleagues in particular are doing on the last day. There's 3 sessions that are co-organized there. It gives you a sense of the amount of kind of engagement that our postgraduates have in this community, as well as with members of staff. So we have quite a kind of sort of a collective identity, and we try to cross-plug our various events. You'll come across this again. So, my starting point for this talk is that I've been asked in this session to talk about my recent book. So this is Technologies of Choice. You've got the flyer, I think, if you're looking for another flyer. We've got additional flyers there, and I'm giving them away at author price during the conference. So for 240 rands, which is the price I pay when I go to MIT Press, you can pick up a copy. I've got a few here. I know that it's been difficult to get a hold of in South Africa, so just be warned, it's a university publisher, not for profit, so it's just that little bit slower to kind of get a hold of. I've been publishing in this area with one central question, which is this question about what do we mean about when we say development. And in particularly in ICT4D, what do we mean with the D? What do we mean with that development? And I would argue that we're not hearing enough when authors are presenting at conference or they're writing articles, we're not hearing enough of what they mean when they say D. What's their D? What's their understanding of development? So let me try a thought experiment with you. If you think for a moment, you won't have to share, but think for a moment, what is it that you personally value most? Okay. So I'm betting with you that very few people in the room will have thought piles and piles of money. Many of you will have thought about things like relationships. You might have thought about things that you might want to do, like travel. You might have thought about, big sort of houses because that allows you to live with the people that you care with, etc. What I'm trying to make clear there is that for many of these things, you're going to need money. But it's not the money you're after as an end. You want it as a mean. The economic resource is a means, it's not an end. So at the individual level, we've got this idea that there's economic resources and then there's a multitude of things that you could technically do with it. Now, scaled up with this, when we talk about development, we often talk as though economic growth, as in the scaled up bit of the economic resources, is the end of development. But it should actually be a means. It's just a means, an enabler. So I want to get away from a growth-focused perspective in development. I don't want us to just get obsessed with growth, economic growth, as the be-all and end-all in development. And that's fundamentally one of the messages of the book. So I want to get away from an econocentric perspective to a much more holistic perspective. I want to move from a linear approach to development, where we can somehow plan what's going to happen, to a much more systemic approach, understanding development as process. From a top-down to much more dialogical form of development, and moving away from a supply-led perspective, particularly in ICT4D, to a much more demand-led or indeed choice-led perspective. So there's my D. That's my kind of thinking around development. And of course, then you start looking around and go, okay, where can I find an approach in development studies that sort of fits this set of criteria? And the capabilities approach, which was introduced by Amartya Sen, who's a Nobel Prize-winning economist, basically says that development can be seen as a process of expanding the real freedoms that people enjoy. So here we've got an approach that doesn't focus on growth, it focuses on the freedoms that people enjoy, specifically the substantive freedom of people to lead the lives they themselves have reason to value and to enhance the real choices they have. Okay? So here we're talking about a radically pluralistic view of development. We're not saying one size fits all, it's basically about saying individuals in the room will value different things. Capabilities are things people have reason to value doing or being. And the capabilities approach is one of these key alternatives, arguably the strongest heterodox or most popular heterodox approach at the moment in development studies. If you know the HDI index for countries, that was basically a crude, this is Zen's word for it, a crude measure that goes into that direction. So the HDI was based on the capabilities thinking. It includes indicators such as health and education as well as growth. And it tried to open up the debate as to which countries were more or less developed. But let's be clear, in the logic of the capabilities approach, all countries are developing because all people are still looking for those sort of increase in choices in order to live the lives that they have reason to value. And when I say choices, I mean meaningful choices. I don't mean which cereal am I going to eat, but big things about who do I want to be, if I've got the grades, what kind of education can I obtain? What kind of life can I live? How free can I be in my expression? So in other words, it's not just the economy, stupid. ICT4D means, in this context, development is freedom. That's the title of Sen's book. And therefore, all countries are, in this logic, are still developing countries. So when we basically teach in, certainly on the masters in ICT4D in London, one of the points I make is that all countries in the world under capabilities thinking are developing countries. By the way, if anyone wants to do some research in the UK on development, come to us. We'll host you. We're keen to kind of have colleagues, especially from the Global South, come and do some research in the field in the UK. So please do come. The problem, of course, with the capabilities approach, it's that it's a stunning theoretical approach. It's extremely deep. It comes from both economics and philosophy. It's very rich conceptually. But my God, is it difficult to operationalize in the field? I see some knowing nods at this point. So it's very difficult to operationalize, okay. And there's an organization, the Human Development and Capabilities Association, that's got more than 200 scholars working on all kinds of things around the capabilities approach. And there's quite a few people who are trying to operationalize the capabilities approach. If we only look into ICT4D, there's a number of people who have been involved in trying to operationalize the capabilities approach in ICT4D, and you can see some colleagues here who have basically been putting this forward. The book Technologies of Choice is the first book-length application of the capabilities approach in ICT4D. And I think it's significant in that it actually allows the space to try and grapple with the theory as well as then follow it through in each chapter. So I will talk a little bit about the framework I use, but basically that framework is then repeated throughout the book. Again, colleagues at the center. So Samia Poveda is working on integrating Freirean ideas into the kind of capabilities thinking when evaluating digital literacy and digital inclusion programs in Brazil, and is doing some really interesting operationalization work around the resources element of the framework. And Tony Roberts has been working on capabilities, critical agency, and participatory video with a huge sort of gender component in Zambia. So there's fascinating work happening around this. This is the choice framework, so this is why I needed a book. It's trying to basically show the development process as a systemic process. So you can see the arrows go in different ways. You can see that it involves something involving agency, so the individual. There's a social structure. Choices emerge from this, and then there's development outcomes, effectively the achieved functionings, the achieved things that people have reasons to value. Now I'll start with the kind of philosophical basic, that basically Zen says the most important primary outcome in a development approach should be choice. So that's in there. The next logic is, because it's radically pluralistic, individuals will themselves have preferences as to what it is that they want to achieve. So it might be increased mobility, it might be increased knowledge, could be easier communication, better social relationships, and so on. But this is fundamentally chosen by the individual. It's not a given. So how do you get to an expansion of these choices? Well, you start with talking about an individual. So that this person has got a specific, say, age, gender, ethnicity, background, and they have a set of resources. Significantly, I was inspired from the Sustainable Livelihoods framework to kind of use the set of resources here. But significantly, the majority of these resources are not material. Okay, So where in the livelihoods framework we have much stronger emphasis on also material resources. Yes, they're there. Material resources, financial resources are here, natural resources. But then there's health, there's social resources, social capital sometimes being described as the capital of the poor. We can have a long discussion about that, but social resources are here. Educational resources. That's absolutely central for me because it's significant that even very poor people can have immense psychological resources in terms of their perseverance, their tenacity, the way that they kind of get through adversity, their creativity, their entrepreneurialism. And it's something that is not sufficiently recognized. There's then also information, time, which I refer back to, financial resources, geographical resources, has to do with location, but also how you feel in a particular place, and cultural resources. Cultural resources, again, some of the collective and the individual stories that we tell have huge implications for the way that we as individuals feel powerful or powerless. And then there's structure. And this is important, and it's something that sometimes doesn't get reflected sufficiently in the capabilities approach. There isn't much talk about structure in Sen's key work, Development as Freedom, for example. But I've put it, and I've even put it up in the corner above agency, because institutions and organizations matter, policy and programs matter, discourses, significantly discourses matter. The fact that there is a discourse out there about, for example, learning ICTs and personal social mobility, that discourse matters about how people engage with technology. The idea that high-end technology is often associated with status, that's kind of involved in sort of discourses around where you are in a society and as a society. Then there's formal and informal laws, which include, importantly, norms on the use of time and the use of space. So you can think of spaces where men and women can go, spaces where only men are kind of feel particularly welcome, and spaces where particularly women feel welcome. So there are norms, and these are often informal. And then, of course, there's technologies and innovations. And here ICTs also play a role in terms of their availability, and their affordability, and the skills needed for them. So what I'm arguing is that individuals navigate this structure, use these resources to navigate the structure to then achieve degrees of choice. And here, degrees of empowerment, as they're called in the choice framework, they come as existence of choice, sense of choice, use of choice, and achievement of choice. So this is not a uniform category either. There might be choices that are out there, but people are not aware that they are able to take them up. And then these things come up. I'll take you through with an example, okay? So there's me doing field work in rural Chile. And this space, I'm kind of in my early 30s. And doing this field work, and I would love to move faster from A to B. I would love to take a bike and just kind of get faster from A to B. My health is okay, I'm able to do that. I've got enough understanding of how to ride a bike to actually do that. Psychologically, I feel, I can, cycling is okay and I won't be run over by a truck, unlike in London. I have the material resources. I've got the financial resources to buy myself a bike, material resources. The natural resources is flat enough for me to kind of get around in terms of geographical resources. I've got the time to actually do it. In fact, it would actually give me more time if I were able to use that bike. So that's great. I've got all of this together. I can do bike, right? I can ride a bike. Problem is in the structure. Okay, so they've got the infrastructure. There's roads around. The technology is there, so the bike has been invented, right? But there are these informal laws, and indeed discourses related to them, that women shouldn't really be cycling on their own, kind of long distances, rural area. It's not a thing that you do. You basically ask a man for a ride, or you take the bus. You're not kind of cycling in the countryside as a sort of single woman. So at that point, my wonderful agency stops. It's kind of when it interacts with the structure, can't go. So the existence of choice, no, not really, because of the informal rules in that situation. It's kind of there that my capabilities there get stuck. My capabilities are there, but I can't realize them because of the structural situation. So what you can basically do with the framework, and hopefully, if you're a guy, for example, if you change the gender element here, everything else is the same. It works. The informal laws basically say an individual male can be cycling in rural countryside on their own, not a problem, that's culturally accepted. The choice exists. They will hopefully sense that choice. They can use that choice, they can achieve that choice, and they get the mobility. So you can see how this might work, this kind of dialogical relationship between agency and structure. And there's an interesting twist to this, that basically if at any point these norms change, for example through practice, a group of women decides, hey, we're going to do it anyways. Then they might over time change those norms. This might change, and the more of them actually achieve their capabilities, you actually have a feedback loop into the structure and a feedback loop back into agency. So you get a sense of some of the systems idea here. These are just some of the kind of key ideas that are in the framework. I'm obviously in the book have time to lay it out more clearly, also explaining where it's kind of come from. So Altop and Heinsohn here in 2005 basically produced a framework which talked about empowerment. It's a much simpler kind of version, but these are some elements that I felt it was important to add. And I felt this after doing some fieldwork. So it was, if you want, in a relationship with that fieldwork that the choice framework emerged. This is sort of my future project. All of this needs to be thought in terms of an ecological, limited environment. So that's kind of the next step. I can talk about that in questions. So how might this be applied? Number one, we need to question the kind of ideologies that are written and embedded in technologies. We need to do some systemic mapping of development processes, and this is the most ambitious, we may be able to design for choice. So we may be able to think ahead how we influence this system. My case study in the book are these ICT policies in Chile. This, by the way, is the cover photo without the motherboard superimposed. And then you've got in Chile situation when the fieldwork started, where Chile was a leader in ICT policy in Latin America. It was enjoying continued economic growth, low levels of corruption, a high literacy level, good IT infrastructure. In fact, there's 1,000 kilometers, and they had an internet backbone running the entire length of the country, which is very useful, especially when your country is shaped that way. There was, however, a high level of social inequality and a high level of regional inequality as well. This is a country that stretches from the Atacama Desert down to the ice. So there's risk of digital divides along existing social divides. None of this is particularly new. You have a case study there where in theory you have the possibilities for great IT-assisted development, but there's some significant challenges around e-inclusion. The methodology policy in having these interviews with civil servants at the sort of highest national level and trying to understand their vision for the country. Then interviews with civil servants and academics, analyzing the secondary data there, and then the big focus on the local level. So 6 months spread across a year, looking, sort of staying in the local community, doing participant observation there, mapping the infrastructure there, mapping social networks, doing the interviews and doing media usage charts parallel to the interviews, and doing also focus groups with particular groups such as micro-entrepreneurs. Let me give you a little bit of the contrast, if you want, the central contrast of the book, which is that between the capital and the local area. So this is the capital perspective. So this is the central business district in Santiago de Chile. You've got Wi-Fi in the underground, something that Londoners are still hoping to achieve at some point. And you've got a comprehensive agenda digital, which is effectively a whole set of policies that are supposed to go across different departments at governmental level. The ones that I focused on in particular was this network of info centers or telecenters, the e-government system, and the digital literacy training that was on offer. This is also the reality of Santiago, as in you have middle class, mestizo guys, or also women in Santiago walking around with their laptop. Connectivity is not a problem, and having access to computers is not a problem. There's a discourse of social mobility related to learning English, and a discourse related to that, to social upward mobility related to ICTs. And obviously universities in Chile are very much involved in this discourse. This is where the e-procurement policy is being made. So this is very close to the central business district. You have Chile Compro's offices in this tower, and this is the perspective basically where this reverse auction system is being thought up and designed. It's effectively a system which is intended to make procurement, as in the public procurement, which is the state buying goods and services for citizens, to make that more efficient and more transparent. I should say more efficient and more transparent, focusing in particularly on price as the comparison criteria between different bidders. So the state, for every public tender that goes out, everything needs to go into this system if it's more than about £35. So even relatively small bids have to kind of go through the system. And then the individual entrepreneurs can bid for this tender by the state in this online auction system. And the main comparison criterion really is if you want value for money, but it often translates as price. And so when I interviewed it, the deputy director of the Chile Compro e-procurement system was explaining, the important thing is that people are proactive and are interested in doing better than others. We have to create the conditions and the tools in which they can do that. This all has to do with the economic model in which Chile is developing itself. Yes, in the end, this is a neoliberal market economy in which the lances all point in one direction so that the most efficient will win. The lances all point in one direction. I believe that essentially one has to invest much more in education in the regions as well. This is him going on explaining how he's worried about the social differences in the regions, because he wants everyone included in his vision of progress. I believe that essentially one has to invest much more in education in the regions as well, especially the rural sphere. How to include it in the wagon of productivity, in the engine of development. But at the same time, this is difficult because there are also obviously values of those communities, values that can be from another planet, even other spiritual beliefs. So this is also the frustration of this policymaker based in Santiago with the different cosmovisions, including indigenous cosmovisions, that are existent in the rural sphere. So in the local community, as I'll show you, where I was, there was 60% indigenous population, with a very, a much stronger kind of communal vision of what their future should be like, but also some other things I'm not sure they would necessarily agree with, that the aim was for everyone being interested in doing better than others. And there was some distinctive different visions going on. The problem that I have with this is that from a capabilities approach, this is an incredibly monolithic understanding of development. This is literally, he's using the words, the wagon of productivity and the engine of development. This is the language of, there's only one track, there's one wagon, either on board or you're not on board. And this is antithetical to what basically the capability approach is about, which is radically pluralistic. Now remember, the lives, they themselves, people themselves, have reason to value. So there's clearly a kind of a different understanding here of development going on. This is the local community in which I was working. Because I use a lot of details, I'm actually a non, but only around less than 20 of them are actually doing sort of what you might call productive activities. A lot of jobs are in the forestry sector here. Public infrastructure is kind of cash-strapped, and there's high under and unemployment in this region. In fact, in the past 10 years, Algun has lost 10% of its population between two 10-year censuses. I'm a geographer, so one of the things I do like is get a better hang of the spatial setup. It doesn't always have to be a map, as I'll explain, but maps are incredibly useful. One of the things that a mapping of the area showed was that there was a strong tradition of shared access. So you could actually see a lot of shared phones in shops and in phone booths. There's some more seats here in front. There was cyber cafes, and in fact, cyber cafes, when I started the field work, there were 5 cyber cafes. A year later, there were 7 cyber cafes. So there was clearly some kind of expansion in the kind of market, or the expected market, for these services. There was also an info centro, which means that there was a free access point provided and funded by the state, which was in the local library, not very far from the plaza. This was also the reality of Algun, where you have different technologies existing next to each other. So the ox cart with the car, and the space in which the private infrastructure of cyber cafes sat cheek by jowl with the less developed cash-strapped infrastructure of the roads. Big potholes, great pain, especially in winter, when there was a lot of mud on the roads. This was also the reality. So this is in the house of one of my informants, and basically here you have the kind of computers integrated into the living room. And this gives you a sense of how technology was seen also as a status symbol that you integrated into your house and you displayed in the kind of best part of your house. This is the telecenter. So you have a free internet access, public computer access. There was a small fee for printing, but it was generally an open space run on the same public opening hours as the library, and also hosting the IT courses that were also offered for free for out-of-school adults. The goals were clearly social inclusion and equal opportunity. So there was an understanding there of what they wanted to achieve. So let's have a look at Marta Castillo. So names changed, obviously, but this is a participant in the story, in the research. So Marta Castillo is a micro-entrepreneur, single mom, head of household with 3 kids and a grandmom to look after. She's on a low income, has only had basic education, And she used to be a nana, as in a cook maid, or a maid in Santiago, which means that she not only got excellent cooking skills, but she also got an awful lot of kind of cultural resources around presenting food, giving it fancy names, decorating it properly, etc. So she's, in this small community, has got a distinct advantage around this particular knowledge. So we'll come back to that. Marta is also incredibly curious and entrepreneurial, if you want, as an individual. She took the free IT courses at the Info Centre, and she doesn't live very far. She lives about 15 minutes from the Info Centre. She uses the internet in the Info Centre to research recipe to diversify her production. In particularly, she's figured out that the population in Algun is getting older, the incidence of diabetes is higher, and she's figuring that she needs to change her kind of pastry and cake production that she wants to sell in the community towards more diabetics. So Marta's basically interested in providing cakes, pastries, dough. She sells dough particularly for so-called housewives who are in a hurry and basically just need the dough pre-made. And she's also providing some small catering services to the local teaching college, to the teachers of the local college. But she would like to do more for this kind of catering. And so she hopes to organize women to provide jam for local schools and hospitals, potentially also a catering service. But basically tapping into a market. There's a lot of kind of rolls and jam eating in Algun, and she was hoping to basically organize a women's group to kind of sell to the state, to schools and hospitals. This is her media use. I told you about the media usage charts. So her use of the fixed phone line is through local businesses. She herself has a black and white television and a radio. She occasionally picks up a newspaper. And her internet use is all about her use of the Info Centre. So basically she goes to the Info Centre on a daily basis, and this is where her intense internet usage comes from. Mobile she uses, but she uses it in a, if you want, passive way, in that she's beeping, she's waiting for people to give her a ring, etc. She's keeping her credit to a minimum. Sound familiar? In 2005, Marta had never used the public e-procurement Chile Compra. Remember, she wants to sell to the state, but she has no idea of this kind of change towards electronic procurement. Meanwhile, the local hospital in Algun, as in her hoped-for trading partner, started using Chile Compra, and it was then regularly sourcing 25 jars of jam from a large distributor in Santiago as part of a big package that basically was procured through this online system. So this brought, for the hospital, this brought costs down generally, but it effectively meant that Marta was locked out of selling to the local hospital. So again, in the book I have more time to go into the particular procurement discussion, but in this particular case it shows how introduction of ICTs can have negative development effects, parallel to the positive development effects that the Info Centre was having. So it's a complex story, and it's under the roof of the same national ICT strategy. So it's worth having a look at that. So effectively, we have with Marta someone who made a life for herself. She was looking after a whole number of kind of dependents, and she had kind of earned the respect in the community. This was a sort of, there was real psychological resources there. At the same time, a very humble person. Information, yes, she needed the information, for example, to know that the telecenter was available, that the course was available. In fact, her social resources meant that she knew the director of the telecenter, which made it easier for her to join the course. Time. Because she was a single mom, she was the head of household, and she had a degree of control over her time. So particular gendered ideas of what kind of women were supposed to do at what time of the day didn't apply to her. In Algun, there was sort of an expectation that women would be providing a cooked meal at the middle of the day, which effectively made it very difficult for them to come, for example, to courses in the morning. But it didn't apply to her. Financial resources were very tricky, very difficult. Geographical resources, she was fairly close to that info center. The material resources were limited, but she had access to the info center. And her cultural resources meant basically that she knew how to behave in a library and felt that she could kind of go there, which wasn't a given throughout the community, but she was in the group that felt that they knew how to operate in that environment. In terms of structures, well, certainly there was a discourse about how significant it was to learn ICTs. That was really important. The idea was that Chile was moving forward. It was moving away from being a developing country. It was going to be kind of a middle or high income country. ICTs were part of that vision, and people needed to get on the sort of wagon towards a kind of technological future. There were policies and programs. I've outlined the entire Agenda Digital, but specifically the telecenter was there, new, and of course e-procurement. And there were formal and informal laws, including on the use of space and time. So the library, as I explain in the book, was a heavily female-coded space, especially in mornings. So it meant that women felt that they could go there and learn. So the book also talks a lot about what it meant to actually have a public access space where that was particularly kind of women-friendly as a place to learn ICTs. In terms of norms of usage of time, I've said a few things there. Again, gender is a sort of a key component here. And then technological innovations, the availability, the affordability, and the skills needed for ICT4Ds played clearly a role in this context. So you can explain what's going on, like for example the telecenter coming in as both a new institution enabled by a new technology, which allowed her, based on the information she had, time she had, and the social resources she had, to go operate in this environment, expand her educational resources, and then achieve through an existence of choice, a sense of choice, a use of choice, and achievement of choice, better sort of relationships across space with her migrant son, who was kind of traveling in the country. So she was able to have easier communication and better relationships with her relatives through this kind of complex process. There were, however, limits. So she wanted the increased income through selling to the state. And she knew how to kind of produce the jam of high quality. She had the time. She was thinking about getting the women's group together to pool their financial resources to actually generate the raw material for the jam. She could have pulled all of this off. However, the technologies and the way that they were institutionalized meant that price was so heavily privileged over quality and regional and local sourcing. It meant that the choice didn't exist for her. Even if she had known at the stage where Chile Compra was introduced that this choice was available, actually this didn't happen because it was already geared towards price. So for her to be able to compete in that environment was not a possibility. As a result, she did not achieve her desired outcome, her functioning there. So to conclude, the points that I'm trying to make is that we need to think about development not as growth, but as the freedom of people to live the lives that they have reason to value. So economic resources or economic growth is a means to that, but it's not an end in itself. Individuals and communities may have very different values, so we need the radical pluralism of the capabilities approach to account for that and to do development in a sort of ethical way, which brings people in and their values in. The choice framework, as I've presented it, can be used as a living tool. It's not something static, it's not kind of done. A lot more work needs to be done there. See what works for you. I've got colleagues who are applying it in Brazil and in Sweden and in the US and the Netherlands and in South Africa. Many of them find it too complex to basically do it in depth on all of these elements. So I would strongly recommend, if you're using it, that you basically focus on particular elements that are particularly resonant in your context. You can still use the framework overall as an orientation, but then go into more depth in the areas that are most relevant to you. So Samia, who I mentioned, is a colleague of mine, is working particularly on this agency and resources area. Check also what ideas are already embedded in technologies. So if we really want to use technologies to affect this system, then we need to think about, okay, what kind of technologies do we want to introduce into this context, and how might existing technologies be subverted or changed, or indeed are there subversive technologies that can be introduced at this particular point. We can probably assume that if we just sit back and let, basically the market come up with the technologies where there's demand for, the likelihood is that the people who can pay, who are most attractive to the market, will be the ones whose demands and whose lives that they have reason to value will be embodied in technology first, not the more marginalized groups. So if we want to have the voice and the values of more marginalized groups also represented, we probably need some sort of subversion, some form of intervention. We need to recognize the multiple resources of income-poor people. We need to in particular understand that it's not just all about material resources. Time matters, but also psychological resources and cultural resources. And of course information matters. Arguably, it has been, there's a lot of coverage in ICT4D on information. I think information is important, but psychological and cultural resources are important as well. We should never underestimate the agency of people in development, but also we need to recognize that structures are powerful and need to be adjusted to support people's agency. So in the conclusion of the book, I basically say we need structures that empower people and their agency. What I mean by that is that public libraries, public parks, spaces where people can come together to pool their ideas are very valuable, because effectively they are structures that support the growth of psychological resources, of cultural resources. Art spaces, participatory art spaces. Why should we invest in participatory art spaces? Well, one of the arguments is that it actually builds psychological and cultural resources in people, non-material resources that support agency. You can see I'm radically off the script of kind of economic growth, efficiency, and all of that. But that's really the point that I'm trying to make. So we need to seek out mechanisms which allow people to express choice. Open and malleable technology is probably a good way to go. Participatory design, recognizing some of the challenges. I'm thinking e-waste, ecological limits, social challenges around distribution of this technology. Think about voucher schemes in a progressive way. And there's interesting innovations, particularly, say, in the Latin American context, also around participatory budgeting. Participatory procurement could be the next step. And participatory monitoring and evaluation is increasingly used across development studies, and something which we should also embrace. So please think development beyond the growth paradigm, and think about how we might plan and design for choice. Thank you very much, and I'd be very interested in your comments, your feedback, and your ideas. Thank you.
camp of economic thinking in development. Let's say even in the bigger institutions, the World Banks of this world. How to overcome that? How to create a bridge to cross the gap and to talk with the people who only talk economic language and let them understand that there's much more beyond economics, beyond dollars or euros or whatever. That's one question. The other one relates to something, a remark yesterday, and actually your invitation for researchers here to come to England and research developed countries. As you mentioned, every country is still developing. I think this could be used for European Union as well, for procurement, in the Netherlands as well. So how can we get, let's say, these things in place in... You did your analysis, your research in Chile. How can we get these results back to other places like the Netherlands, where I'm coming from?
Absolutely. Okay, well, great set of questions. So, I think we should all spare a thought for, where is he? For Björn Søren Giekler, 2004. He works in the World Bank, and he's one of the people who've made these kind of really early steps in connecting the capabilities approach, operationalizing it for ICT4D. And I'm sure that Björn would be in a better position to kind of tell you exactly what it feels like to be negotiating these kind of different understandings of development on a daily basis. However, I think one of the things I've learned over the years is that these institutions are not monolithical, so you do have very different perspectives once you kind of step away from kind of the official document. Alsop and Heinsohn, 2005, they're World Bank people who kind of produced sort of the setup for the empowerment framework, which then becomes the choice framework. So, I owe people in the World Bank some of these ideas. However, I think as our overall setup, there's no doubt that in development studies, development economics is dominant. And that as geographers, for example, as anthropologists, we are battling against that as a mindset. What's in our favor, I think, is that if you talk to anyone from a big financial institution or however, you talk to them on a personal level, if you talk to them about what they personally value, they get it. They get the idea that fundamentally when you ask them, is not the top information for them is not what's in their bank account or the stock market. The top information is still whether their loved ones are okay. That's still on the hierarchy of need to know. That's still kind of really up there. And so individuals get it. We sadly have gotten into a mindset where we somehow pretend the moment that we scale it, economic growth becomes fetishized, which is crazy. If we can manage to kind of scale up, have the courage to basically believe that the things that are important for us are collectively significant, then I think we're going to come to a much more humane world. And the second point, how do we translate this? I think the fact that working with Brazil, working with South Africa, there's in a sense countries that are figuring out their identity in the kind of global narratives of sort of weird things around developed and developing, and those are dichotomies that I don't subscribe to. And so working with Brazilians has been a revelation in terms of the amount of self-confidence that there is in that country. So they're very happy to teach the world about what Brazil is doing. I think whether it's in the Netherlands or in other parts of Europe, there has been uptake of capabilities thinking in education, in health. So I think that is already happening. It's just that ICT4D needs to also emulate that and get with the program and figure out that actually ICT4D can be done anywhere, including in the US and the UK.
Okay. Any more questions? Professor Klein will be on the session, the last session panel tomorrow. So if you have more questions, you can bring them up during that. that session. But let's take one question, I think.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, you mentioned agency and structure. Is there a particular, what sort of broader theory are you drawing on? I mean, I've read a little bit of structural rationing, critical realism, and my ears just pricked up there. And
Yes.
wondered what was behind that.
Yeah. So my basically I do if you want, structuration theory light, in that I don't go massively into the particulars of structuration theory. But the point really that in the central idea to structuration theory, that basically sort of agency can shape structure just as structure can shape agency, that dialectical relationship, that is embedded in the thinking of the framework. So that's I think. And I think it's a message of hope, of basically saying, yes, we may well recognize that structures can be oppressive and that they are there, whether it's gender structures, structures relating to gender, or other kinds of structures that marginalize people. They are there, they're important to recognize, but it also means that by enacting forms of agency, we can actually contest them, and they're changeable. And they're reinforced through practices, so we can actually, by changing practices, we can change also structure.
And my question actually goes to psychological resources that you were emphasizing. Clearly, are there any specific theories that you can actually point to?
You're taking me into kind of my big caveat around this, which is that under a lot of these, there's a sort of, it's almost like the tip of the iceberg, and there's a big kind of theoretical area, which an individual scholar can never quite do. So I'm not a sort of a specialist on social capital, or on psychological capital, or on any of these. I'm, in a sense, I see myself as someone who, for this particular book, has kind of pulled ideas together and brought them into conversation with each other.
I mean, the reason why I'm asking this question is I'm looking at it in terms of resilience, adaptation theories, and all.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, they are very powerful, especially in developing economies, and how societies actually build the capacity to be able to respond to this particular structures that you are.
Yes. I think one of the things that we should be good at in ICT4D is division of labor, and one of the people I'm kind of looking for, if you want, for another project would be an organizational psychologist to work particularly on this bit there. But you can look at the different elements. Many of them need more work in terms of conceptualizing. And I think the field is wide open.
I mean, to add to it, I have a technology kind of hub in Ghana, University of Ghana, and I do have a psychology student, an M4 student who is actually doing more or less like a study on the students that are actually part of the whole hub. So it's kind of training, and we just want to see the outcome, whether whatever we're doing is having any psychological impact, response in terms of how when students are exposed to innovative training, for example, how does it psychologically enhance their ability to build systems of their own? Yeah. So these are some of the things. That's the reason why I'm particularly more interested in the psychological resource component.
And I think you're onto something, and especially in that context. And I think it's really worth for you to kind of touch base with Samia on this, because she's basically tried to do a comparison of 2 digital literacy programs in Brazil, looking not just on educational outcomes, but also on psychological outcomes. So hey, comparative paper, anyone?
Okay.